signed up for it. Okay, so today, what we're going to talk about is using local events to engage students in historical thinking. And when you see these historical events on the PowerPoint, you are going to be blown away at the detail and the interesting things that will come to mind when you see it. And it fits with Jeni. She is one of the people who tries things and does things. And she's one of the people, if you were here just slightly earlier, that was a person who was always attending things and being part of groups to learn something. Always one more thing. And I'm beginning to find some of the people that are on our list who come are that same way, and they're looking to us and for some of the folks that have been in our area for quite a while. But Jeni's very creative. Before you got on board, she was talking about the mock trial group that she has. They're doing very well, and we're going to cross our fingers on Saturday that they did get the top prize there, and which means you would be going on to the state level. Is that correct? Okay, so that would be something wonderful for our region, wouldn't it? And then what we'll do with her next year is ask her to do some sharing about how to get a winning mock trial team. How's that? So anyway, she focuses on helping students and teachers understand how to interpret events and figure out the kind of reactions that people have in relation to the reactions, including themselves. And she encourages her students to work in teams and learn through primary sources, but the richness of the primary sources will blow you away of the kinds of things. And she helps burnish the understandings of the students by challenging them with that kind of thing. And History Day is another one of her areas that she has been working with students for many years. And she had done so many fabulous things with it that she was honored with a nomination from Patricia Bering, National History Day Teacher of the Year, which is just this past year. I think that's pretty cool. So go for it, Jeni, and tell us what you're going to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Peg. And again, it's my honor to be here because a few years back, I got involved in some of the extra PD through LACO, LA County. And my first trip was to the East Coast was through the TAW program. And that's where I got to meet you, Peg, and get to know you and Michelle Herzog and get inspired. And then I jumped right back in here. I didn't even realize that we had local county programs going. Catherine and Liz, you guys are already doing that. So I agree. We have so many great teachers doing great things that have inspired me. So I want to point out that I don't be surprised. I beg, borrow, and I'll hopefully be able to give credit where credit is due. But some of these ideas came from people in this very session. So thank you for that. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm laughing because I'm just thinking like Liz is here. So I'm like, okay, great. I think I can get this done. Can you guys all see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay, so Peg asked me to talk, and I remember we sat down on. I have a boat now down in San Diego, so not far from Carlsbad, and just chatting about like, oh my gosh, what are we going to talk about? One of the things that I do find with History Day is that really has helped me infuse a lot of primary sources with my students. And then thinking about bringing it local. If you do History Day, you know that, one of the prizes is if the kids can get into something local, then it just makes it much more relevant. So I basically picked up a lot of these. I think many of these came from talking with other teachers and through other PD. This wasn't something I went out and searched and found completely on my own. So I wanted to point that out. And currently, let's go on to the next one. I don't know how many of you guys feel like me, but this is how I feel walking into my history classes. I mean, everybody was so excited to go back in person, right? And the big challenge in my history class, I'm teaching regular US history. This is not AP, no high level. This is a required class. And I would say that most of my students come in at the beginning of the year hating history. Really like not going to be engaged. Why do I have to take this? It's not relevant. And I have a lot of heads down. So I don't know if you guys are encompassing or encountering the same dilemmas with just being able to motivate some of these high school kids or middle school kids to value the content. And if you guys could share in the chat too, or unmute yourself if you're feeling like I am this year.
I definitely feel like that. I teach 8th grade U.S. history, and 6th and 7th grade, you know, ancient and world history is just not really something that grabs kids unless they're one of those, you know, history buffs for the most part. And I kind of feel like history is like red wine. You don't really appreciate it till you get older.
So true.
And so
Yes.
unless you have a super motivated teacher who can, like, you know, knock it out of the park. And so what I have my students do at the beginning of each year is I have them write down just every negative spot they have about history, any negative experiences they had before, not like, you know, like bash teachers, but just like, you know, whatever their preconceived notions are that are bad. I have to write them all down. And I say, I'm never going to ask you to reveal them. And then we ball them all up. And we have like a snowball fight. And I say, I want you to let all those go and just try to come to my class with an open mind, you know, and try to experience things, or, you know, try to put that behind you so that you can see things through a different lens.
Thanks for, that's you, Stacy, right? That shared that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. I did middle school 7th and 8th. I've never done 6th, but you know, you notice that the first history experiences we tend to do as a self-contained class, it's like ancient world, you know? And I think you're right. Like, I know my 8th graders were so excited to get to this part of high school US history. And so it kind of breaks my heart when I see them coming in. They're like, I hate it, hate it. I'm like, you haven't even hardly had experience with it yet. But I love that snowball analogy too. You know, open mind, just give me a chance, right? So I can see the chat. So yeah, K8, Angelica, right? Until 10th grade. Wow. And they do come in with some preconceived notions, which is surprising. I remember parents even telling me, I never liked history, so I understand why my kid's not passing. I'm like, oh. I know, I love that point, Liz. Why haven't I learned more of this? Right? Like, why didn't I ever know? I'm thinking, that's why we're here. Okay. So my history, I've taught 27 years now, spent most of my time in middle school, and then jumped to high school about 6 years ago. I taught English for the first 4 years that I was at the high school, and then I finally got back into my history department. And one thing that very first year with my students, I started in Adelanto Middle School, and I remember I had a large Hispanic first gen population, and great kids, great academic. They were super motivated, but they were very honest when they said, they raised their hand about, you know, we're probably colonial, early America. And, you know, they said, Miss B, where's the Mexicans? And I'm like, okay. So right away, being my Caucasian background and my ethnicity, I really hadn't noticed that. It was eye-opening for me. And I was like, okay, there aren't Mexicans. Mexico's not a country yet. You'd be able to explain that. This is basically, you know, Europeans, Africans, Native Americans, but we'll get there. And then finding that as we continued through the history book, we never really got there. I had to supplement right away with more of the history that they would recognize and be able to relate to. So always being conscious that I point out, first of all, that early American history is not as diverse as our country is today, but that's not because we're ignoring it. And then trying to be conscious about making sure that all my students feel like this is our history that is part of it. So I think coming local, bringing it to the local level is where I found it's been even more relevant because we can all relate to our local areas the same or in similar ways. So I'm just going to jump right in with one of the early topics that, you know, a lot of us touch on, even if we don't teach US history. We're talking about Brown versus Board of Education with Dr. King and some of the other civil rights things that pop up. Even my daughter teaches about segregation in her 3rd grade classes. So, you know, this is a very important landmark case. And I'm pretty confident that by now, many of us have already been exposed to the Mendez case in 1946. So 8 years earlier, we have a California case. So bringing it back to California, but also bringing it to another group of people fighting for their equality from segregation is important. But how about the rest of you? Like the Mendez case is pretty, it's getting out there where I think about 10 years ago, I remember most people I encountered had never heard about the Mendez versus Westminster case. Most of you guys, you can kind of show in the chat, how many of you guys, you're all pretty confident? That you have this, because I could go into it. Yeah, I see thumbs up, Angelica. And it was in a PD that I heard about this case, right? And I was like, again, I didn't learn about it in school. I grew up here in California, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to start teaching this to my students. And right away, it really connected them. They loved hearing about the story of the Mendez family. It's really good too, because it brings in our Japanese culture and heritage with the internment and how the Manumitsu family entrusted their property to the Mendez family. So we all know about that. In fact, I put a copy of this more current book by that is telling the story of the Mendez case by, and I'm not gonna be able to pronounce the last name, Duncan Tenatio. But definitely something that you can see can even be read too. I think I bought that for my daughter in her 3rd grade class. But thanks to Liz Ramos, as we sit and chat about different cases, we were having this conversation, Liz, I don't remember, you know, if you remember having this. Yes, good. The Lopez versus Seacombe case. Excellent, you guys are going exactly where I'm at. So one thing I noticed when I purchased this book and I read it, and I'm not sure you guys are aware, it references that case. So if you didn't know about it before, I would just play this real quick excerpt and share with you. I hope the sound comes through. I think it will.
One day, a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. You know, said the truck driver, you could file a lawsuit. The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of people in San Bernardino and had helped them integrate the public schools there. At that time, not only were schools segregated, but also other public places as well, such as pools, parks, and movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Mr. Mendez decided right then and there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to.
So I'm not sure how many of you guys are aware that the attorney that fought the Lopez case becomes the attorney that the Mendez family hired. It's not always easy to find that information. And so I was like, wow. And I love that this actually presents it even for our elementary school grades. But, you know, being from San Bernardino County, it is so exciting when we hear our county name on anything. So I'm not sure if you guys were aware of that resource. I wanted to make sure I shared that. Oops. And just a little bit about it, if you're not familiar with the Lopez case, I actually had students choose to do this case for their History Day project this year, and they uncovered even more for me, which was great. History Day gives kids an option to do some of the work that, we don't always have time to, and they were uncovering some really cool information. Of course, letting our Hispanic Mexican students know that there was segregation here. The term Mexican was not exclusive to being from Mexico, making sure our students understand anyone of Latino heritage. If you looked, anybody with darker skin, brown skin, could only swim. And this was not just in San Bernardino, this was in Orange County. It was a very common practice that some pools would be open only one day a week. This probably stems from the idea that the NAACP was suing many communities that equal was not happening because city pools were completely off limits for certain groups. And so that was a tactic the NAACP was using. And so oftentimes the practice was that they could swim only on Sundays, and then it was drained. I can't even imagine the cost of that. Drained and cleaned before and refilled before it was open to the white public. And they were completely barred at the Paris Hill Park pool in San Bernardino. They didn't even get in on Sunday. So the attorney, David Marcus, does file this class action lawsuit on behalf of 8,000 Latinos. And it's not just about the pools, it's actually about the public parks. And the lead plaintiffs in the case were quite established professionals. One was a pastor, one was a local business person. They had established themselves to be very upstanding characters in the community and also contributing taxpayers. Yet their tax money is going to pay for these pools and this park, but they could not partake in it. So that was a very swift, actually not too difficult victory in the courts. In February 1944, the federal judge issued an injunction immediately mandating equal access to the pool for Latino residents. This is going to set the precedent that then leads to Mendez and then leads to Brown. So again, teaching our students that it was right here in our backyard. I believe this pool was filled in, right? I don't think it's still a pool, public pool anymore, but there's a park. If I'm not mistaken, I've not been to the park. So, and this is a good book to use that if you were the lower grades, but also even the upper grades, to encourage this exploration and awareness that right here, I always encourage my students too. This opened up my middle school's opportunity for them to start talking to their parents. And they would go home with their parents and their grandparents would tell them they remember having these restrictions in their local parks or pools, that they couldn't swim or go to the movie theater and things like that. So conversations they had never had with their own families were starting to happen, which is so exciting because, a lot of times parents and grandparents just don't think that it's important or relevant, or the kids are old enough for it. So I like that it also opens dialogue in many of our families for these students to connect and learn about their heritage, which also reminds me, I don't know if you guys have all heard the story that the case of the Mendez, or the case of, no, it wasn't Sylvia Mendez's case. Which one was the lawsuit for the Japanese internment?
Korematsu.
Yeah, if you've ever heard her speak, right? She tells it she'd never heard what her family had done until she was in her high school history class, and she noticed that there's a reference to her father. She knew it had to be him. It was like, and then she comes home that day and is like, is there something you guys didn't tell me? Her family, and that was Fred Korematsu's daughter. So you're like, oh, so a lot of times these families are living through history, but they're just not having the dialogue with their children. And so if we can get that going, I think, especially with a lot of our Hispanic families, that there could be some recognition that there was a lot more discrimination than, they've learned about. So just to encompass that whole little section, as explained in El Espectador, edited by the leading plaintiff, Ignacio Lopez, the ruling was a mandate for broadened civic action in the electorate that originated in the Latino community itself. Just thinking in the chat, why is this information? Why would it matter to our students to know this? Or you can speak out and unmute yourself for a small enough group. Whichever is easier for you.
Um, one of the things that I am noticing is how much this relates to what's going on right now with the election changes that are happening in a lot of states to disenfranchise the same community. And it's kind of depressing now that we're learning this supposedly was taken care of during World War II. But because so many people had been drafted, they didn't ask, what your ethnicity is in the draft. They just drafted everybody. But only some folks were able to get the honors and all of that kind of stuff that was given to some people. But that discussion might come up very dramatically in classrooms that are asking about what's happening right now in our country with state changes in election laws.
I agree, Peg, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And I'll make a comment on that. I was just going to read what Liz wrote as well. To see the story of Latinos in history, to see local history, part of the CRM, it's not just issues in the South, right? When we think about the civil rights movement, we tend to have a specific vision of what that was, but there is a very hefty, especially out West here, Latino history and civil rights. I don't know about you guys. I found that in the classes that I'm teaching, a lot of times it's my Hispanic girls who will tell me they're not going to vote. They don't believe in voting. They don't think government's important. They don't think history. Why am I learning this? And I always think that when we talk about these types of stories and they learn about the student walkout, the Chicano student walkout, and all of these other things, they really did turn like, oh, wait, maybe voting matters. Maybe I recognize that it's part of my privilege and responsibility too, right? So I didn't know if any of you guys ran into that, where I just started seeing a pattern. I was like, what? They're like, no, I'm never gonna vote. Yeah. And also LGBTQ before Stonewall here in LA. At the end, I hope that you guys or in the chat now, if you guys have other local issues and local knowledge, please share it, because I absolutely am not the authority and I don't have all of it. But I did want to point out, it put me in touch with a local gentleman. If you're at the high desert, you might know Felix Diaz, or who Felix Diaz was. But Felix Diaz was born in the high desert, grew up in Victorville largely. And one of the coolest stories, my children were playing baseball in Evadale Park over across the tracks in Victorville. And I can't even remember where I first learned it. But then somehow I learned that was the Mexican school for a long time. That's where young Mexican students attended all the way through until they went to, Victor Junior High, but Victor High School. Victor High School was integrated. There was one high school up here. But if you're a high desert person like me, I was like, what? We had a Mexican school here in the high desert? And then to know that my children were playing ball in the park there and we were right around it. So I got really excited when I found Felix had written about this experience in his book called Footprints from the Barrio. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, primary source, firsthand account. And let me grab the book. It is not easy to get a hold of. That's unfortunate. It is super hard. I found one on eBay. And he came to speak to my kids a couple of times. The last time was in 2020. And he would just tell the stories and, to hear from somebody like how they were treated differently. He talks a lot about the different expectation of him as a Latino in high school. He went on to serve in the Army. He was a big advocate for our ROTC programs in the middle school. He served on the city council. He was a teacher, and I found out he taught with my dad and my mom at Victor High School back before Apple High School even existed. So he even mentioned my dad in his book, and I was super excited about that as well. My parents were teachers at Apple Valley High School, John and Pat Kurtz. And so in the high desert, you stick around long enough, it just trickles and you just follow the same circles. But again, Felix, he was one of my favorite guests to have. Unfortunately, I was just talking to my students about they were doing the Lopez versus Seacom case. And I was like, oh my gosh, get a hold of Felix. You're going to be able to hear, and he'll tell you some great stories. And he passed away this fall. So right, literally, I had just mentioned his name, and I think he passed away that weekend. And my husband, I was like, no, he's going to come in and talk. So I am grateful that he did put a lot of this down into his book. One quote he told the press was, "I grew up back when all the Black and Mexican families were forced to live on the other side of the tracks. You never wanted to get caught wandering across the tracks after dark." So even though he can't still come in person, there are some videos on YouTube where he talks a little bit. But I wanted to again, when we're thinking about talking about segregation, some of his excerpts are pretty powerful. I'll just read a little bit here. He said, "The Black community had it worse by far than we did. Black people living with us in the barrio had mostly migrated from southern states, knew their place, and therefore would behave accordingly. It was at that time that I began to acquire a hate for white folk. We basically stayed in the barrio and only came across when going to the movies, to church, or to higher grade schools. Otherwise, we would find things to do at the Mojave River or in the streets, and we were able to entertain ourselves. Some of us hated to come across the tracks for fear of being tagged by the sheriff, store merchants, or adults. Sometimes we were asked, 'What are you doing over here?' 'Go back where you came from.' When going to the old Mesa Theater, we were escorted to the left side if we happened to forget our place. We were often given directions as to where to go or where we belonged, or to go there or stay there. As far as I can remember, I was never mistreated or racially discriminated against by white youth, only on many occasions by white adults." And he goes on and on. There's just so many of these little nuggets. I mean, he talks about the Zoot Suit riots and how it was, learning about what was going on with the Zoot Suit riots in LA and how it affected them up here. He actually he got polio. He survived polio. I believe polio and tuberculosis was my favorite story. He was hospitalized as a young boy because he picked up a cigarette off the street from a guy who was smoking and had tuberculosis, and he caught it and survived. But he talks even about so there's medical stories of like, what was tuberculosis like, a disease we don't really see anymore. So again, if you're from the high desert and you can get your hands on this book from Felix Diaz, I think you'll find he just talks about so many events and aspects that you want to know what were people thinking up here, and from that lens, it's like my special treat. I love to pull that out whenever I can. Hi, Laura. That's good to see you here too. Yeah, I see California has a history of also being progressive. California would never do those things. I love that you pointed that out. Again, I think you're right. We tend to look, oh, it's them Southerners, right? It would never happen here. And I think, you watch a movie like 42 where they're like, no, they didn't or segregate. And then you see that absolutely. And I think that it's important to hear this history so that their grandparents feel like it's safe to tell. It's not something that we're ignoring anymore. So one of its experiences I'm doing actually through National History Day right now are these webinars with the Library of Congress. And some of you guys might have done them before. They're really amazing. I put a link to them at the end. But they have really, really good strategies to use with primary sources in your students. And this is one I was just going to walk you guys through. You could pick any primary source, and you just start with the observe, right? Start with the basic. These are those entry level skills any student can do. And what I actually acknowledge, and I know the rest of you guys have seen it too, is history. I love history being a mixed level of skills and abilities. I always tell people I can teach many levels in the same class because it's often new, and often my SPED or my ELL students that notice things that other people don't. So it's definitely an empowering opportunity when you allow them to enter into these things that any student can be successful. What do you notice, right? What do you see in this picture? TCI was always good about that too. If you've had those materials, all those experiences where they start always with early entry success. I really like the third bullet. What did you notice that you didn't expect to? Maybe if any of you guys would like to chat in and looking at this image, are you seeing anything you didn't expect to see or can't explain? I always make my students look at it for a long time And again, okay, keep looking. What did you notice you didn't see earlier? So they all look. And again,
When I think of a dude ranch, I think of like guys or cowboys.
right? So you don't expect to see a girl.
And definitely not in those shoes.
Exactly. Goodness.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, is somebody going to point out the shoes? Because I had horses and I don't know that we ever went around in sandals. Heck no.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be hanging out in a, my top with the midriff showing. Think of a dude ranch. I think of working hard. I think of chores. I think of, I don't know. I also kind of thought when I looked at this that my students might notice the price tag of the publication.
Right?
25 cents has very little value, but given that it's 1947, what would that be? What would that really equate to in today's dollars? I also, when I first looked at this, I thought maybe I was looking at the actress from Star Trek at first blush.
Right? Yeah.
Because there's a similar hairstyle, and just at first glance, I thought maybe it was, so I assumed it was an actress that was posing for this picture, and perhaps not, but.
Yeah, I like those observations. I think students notice those as well. I like Angelica, you pointed out like she should be wearing jeans, riding horses. And Laura pointing out that, yeah, she does look like she's super comfortable there, which is, again, something that we don't associate people of color, women of color with dude ranches, right? So then you move your kids, they have a good conversation. And this always opens up. I've noticed when I use this strategy, my students just immediately engage because there's no wrong answer. They're always trying to get something somebody else didn't see. Then I have them reflect. I go too far. Sure. Okay. So then we move to reflection. So where do you think this came from? I love the 25-cent point out, Catherine, because again, 25 cents. Why do you think this is made? Why was this picture taken? 1947, in the front of Ebony magazine. Who's the audience? This is a very good question for this type of a publication. Is this going to go to the general population?
No.
Certainly not, right? And why would this be important? I think Laura's pointing out, right? This is counter to the expected stereotypes and what a dude ranch is. So you engage kids in a little bit of that deeper thinking so that again, you're modeling that. Let's start where everybody can enter and then let's keep thinking. We're not done. Keep thinking. And then you can follow up with the questions. And if you've ever done the QFT question formulation technique, this can become an entire research thing. They go on beyond it. But you can have kids just start generating and wonder. I notice with my students, they need to wonder. They don't wonder anymore. They have all their answers at their fingertips, but they don't wonder. They're like, ah, that's good enough. Right, and this is before the civil rights movement. This is pre-1950s, World War II era, right, coming out of World War II, right at the tail end. So, or the years that follow. What do you wonder about? And making students generate questions. In the QFT, you can have them do open-ended, close-ended, right? And talking about the difference, you can have them organize, you can have them prioritize, pick the 3 you want to answer, right? You need to answer. And then I've had where we move into the class where I said, okay, research, see if you can find the answers. And they share out, and the connection, but because it's their questions, it has generated great interest. And I do like that, Laura, too. Yeah, a sense of freedom in her posture. Confidence, freedom does not fit with what we know about the era. And yeah, is she famous? Why her? So this activity is so simple. I love it because it's one of those go-to that I don't really need a lot. And we did it in the conference I was in with the picture of the lynching. A man was lynched today. And we talked about how this shows how people try to get information to the public. You know, what is this saying and why would this be important? You know, and it really went in depth. So you can find images. The Library of Congress actually has this available for different types. So if this is an image type, or if this is a text type, there are a few different questions. They alter a little bit, but this is just simple strategy. I put a link in there for you guys. So if you aren't familiar with this tool, I think it's just one of those go-tos to pull out of our pocket whenever we need it. And again, I'm just passing along what I've seen. I'm not the expert. I agree. It's definitely going to be, people are going to pick it up because it's going to be such a strange view. Like, wait, what are you talking about? So, let's see. I just, in researching it, these are some of the things that I was able to come across. There are links I put in here to more in-depth coverage of this, but the Dude Ranch they're talking about was in Apple Valley, California, Victorville, Apple Valley borders. I think it actually might've been in the Victorville. It's right past Bell Mountain. So if you drive into Barstow to LA or Las Vegas.
Is it the Apple Valley Inn?
No, it's not. It's actually beyond Bell Mountain and it doesn't exist anymore. There's like some concrete left. But funny thing, my mom and dad moved out here in 1960s. And this Dude Ranch was operated, a great story behind it, to a couple of color. And they were able to open it. They actually opened it as an orphanage. They took in a lot of foster youth and young children, and to help offset the cost, they created a kind of a place out in the middle of the desert that would draw even celebrities. So you can see here, they were bringing in a lot of the famous celebrities of the time period of color. It's interesting. I've also, there's a link to a long, extensive research history of this, but people of all colors were welcome. They had a big famous food, dining that a lot of people go and eat. But if you were white, you were not welcome by the white community to stay overnight. You were welcome at the Dude Ranch too, the Murray Dude Ranch, but you weren't. You could be ostracized in the social realms of the rest of the community, of white community, if you stayed overnight. But you do see like this picture at the bottom, that this is a photograph from the Ebony magazine article, and there's some diversity in that photo. So I'm still working to try and get my hands on the Ebony actual edition. So I'm really trying to find that. I keep looking at eBay to see if I can find that one out there. It has been up for sale from time to time, but I have not been able to find one. And I don't know if we have one in our local museums, but there may be there. And then Joe Louis went in 1937. And when he went to the Dude Ranch, he was covered in Life magazine. This is between his two fights, his famous fights with the German boxer. So he lost in 1936 and then defeated it in 1938. What they hail as one of the best, most important prize-winning fights in history, because he knocks out the German during the rise of the Nazis. And I included this clip. If you want to use this image with Joe Louis and why it was a big deal, this America, the Story of Us, episode 9, covers who Joe Louis was and why it was important. And so again, I did get my hands on this Life magazine, and I'm going to be using this when we start talking in my class about civil rights. We're going to talk about Jesse Owens, and we're going to talk about Joe Louis. And one of the things they point out with Joe Louis, even in the episode, is that this was one of the first times that the entire country got behind a Black man and was supporting. Everybody was pulling for Joe Louis to win this boxing match. It was like, the free world of democracy versus the regime under Hitler growing. And it was Black against white, because Hitler, the Nazis even said, like, one of the biggest mistakes the United States made was freeing slaves. And there was a lot of racial argument that, this German was going to win because it shows that white superiority of the Aryan race. So bringing that in, and I'm really excited. I haven't done my civil rights unit. It's going to be a little bit later, but bringing this in and talking about how Americans so easily got behind Black athletes. And what is the consequence of that? Like that it was okay for Jesse Owens to win 5 gold medals and be accepted. It was okay for Joe Louis, and then later on, Jackie Robinson. But even Joe Louis served in the Army, had a moment where he encountered being forced to sit in the back of the bus after this boxing match, being told, move to the back seat. And there's actually a connection between him and Jackie. When Jackie Robinson ended up doing it and getting in trouble, Joe Louis stepped in and used his position and his reputation to help clear Jackie's name. And which is interesting because Jackie goes on then to break the color barrier. So there's a lot of connection, and I just think it's cool. I'm really excited to have this Life magazine where the kids can read the article. We can talk about what significance that would be. The Dude Ranch was eventually bought by Pearl Bailey, the actress. And I have that on the next page. There's a little bit of history here for you guys. Noli and Leela were the owners. That's their Dude Ranch. That's them photographed there. I love, she's so teeny tiny. But they owned it for that period of 19 years and ran it. This is actually a postcard I was able to locate advertising the ranch with them standing by their sign. They opened the ranch as, again, a home for troubled youth. And that included African Americans into the mid-30s. And because of the Depression, they then converted it to the Dude Ranch to raise money to help keep that home open. And they, by the way, they accepted youth of all colors. I think that was something I made and wanted to note with my students. But Joe Louis comes in 1937. That helps. Again, these are all advertising helping. They were the only Black Dude Ranch in the history of the United States that has been ever uncovered. So becomes a vacation location. She was also a member of the Victorville Chamber of Commerce, loaned the ranch out for charity. That is not Pearly Bailey, it should be Pearl Bailey. Purchased it. And when I was talking to my mom, I said, oh my gosh, Mom, did you ever know about this ranch? She goes, I remember when we moved here that there was a rumor that if you go to the grocery store, you might run into Pearl Bailey. She goes, I never did, but I know friends that did at the grocery store. And again, my mother's almost 80. I'd never had this conversation with her. So I love that this local history tends to get conversations between us and our, former generations. And I'm like, wait, you never told, how'd you know about this Dude Ranch? And I never heard anything, Mom. So, and being a history teacher, I was like, okay. So it eventually fell into disrepair and then was totally demolished by the fire department years later. But there's still some remnants of it out behind Bell Mountain. I just thought it'd get some good conversation. We can talk about, if you look at the research, there are some racial arguments to bring up, like, or racial conversations about who was allowed there and who's not, so forth and so on. And they would tout themselves the only Negro Dude Ranch in the world. Is written right there on their postcard. And having conversations with kids about why would they want to welcome African Americans to a Dude Ranch, right? What is this thing? At the same time, Apple Valley was also welcoming other celebrities of Hollywood into what's that ranch, Catherine, that's over by, the one I'm talking about? There was another exclusive ranch. That's
there was the, of course, now I won't be able to think of his name. You guys in Apple Valley had a stadium. Your stadium was named after him.
Oh, Newton T. Bass.
Newton T. Bass. So you had Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, who brought a lot of Hollywood here. So did Newton T. Bass, had some things going on with that as well. But yeah, this was the place where people from Hollywood would come to recreate and get away from the spotlight and just be able to be themselves. So way out here in the middle of nowhere, as it's always often been referred to, there was a Kemper Campbell Ranch. Thank you.
Yes.
You're absolutely right.
Yes.
And so some of these ranches are still in existence. They may not be open to the public, but their history is still there. And there are some amazing stories of the people that started these these little communities. So yeah, Newton T. Bass had his more commercial things going on. Roy and Dale did an awful lot in the community in terms of charity work and working with women and children. And yes, Kemper Campbell is still going strong down by the Narrows.
Yes, and an Airbnb, I saw that. And so you can see, and you can contrast that, like who was allowed there, what celebrities went there. And again, this is very localized to Apple Valley, High Desert. But again, things were happening here as we talk about, you know, discrimination and different things. And it's interesting you mentioned Newton T. Bass, because I am a graduate of Apple Valley High School. My dad opened Apple Valley and designed all of the logos for that high school. And I will tell you that when that stadium was built, my mother looked, we were driving past it. She goes, I can't believe they're going to name it after him. That was my first ever mention. Like, what do you mean, Mom? Again, our older generations just have so much information. I'm like, will you please tell me? And she
Right.
says, he was a racist.
Right.
And I'm like, what do you mean? And so again, it's really not easy to find. I'm still working on uncovering. But in 2016, one of the Daily Press writers was criticized for mentioning that he was racist in another article. They were talking about the house on the hill, and he responded and included this. I'm still working on getting the actual documents. I still, you know, I want to get this so I can use this with my students, but he had a declaration of restriction in Apple Valley for real estate.
Mhm.
And that's the excerpt right there. And so also people of Jewish descent
Mhm.
were denied purchase. And I have to tell you, growing up in the high desert, my whole life, I was born in 1972. I always wondered why Apple was white, Victor had a larger Black population, and Hesperia had more Hispanics.
Well, can I speak to that? Because when I was growing up in the area, I arrived at George Air Base and then ended up going to local schools through high school and college. And we had students who were bused past Apple Valley High School from Lucerne Valley and other parts of the desert into Victorville. And the reputation at the time was that white kids went to Apple, the more affluent families went to Apple, and Victor Jr. and Victor Sr., where I went to school, were very much minority populations. So there wasn't a legal precedent for that to happen, but there was a practice in place. And as you just talked about, Newton T. Bass is, you know, the stadium, the high school stadium is named after him. And I had a similar conversation. Who is this guy? Why is it? I mean, I know why some of the decisions were made at Victor High School and why different things are named after former employees or principals or members of the school board or the school district. But who was this guy? And that what you have on the screen is what was brought up. Oh, it's a big scandal. Nobody wants to talk about it because he has all of these really distasteful practices, but he was incredibly wealthy and money tended to have quite a bit of pull. So
Yeah. And so, you know, there was a movement. The History Channel actually supported where students were studying and researching history and the names of local places and whether or not it was still worthy to name them and call them those things. Yeah, it's still, depending on where you are, start with the names of what things are called. Like, who is this person? And the house on the hill is still there. And, you know, growing up in Apple Valley, it's definitely something we knew about. Other thing, I was at the Nixon Library when I first recognized the Apple Valley Inn was where Richard Nixon, after losing the election, rented a room and wrote his book, began penning his book. That room is still there. I don't know if they've even acknowledged what it is, but I was like, wait, I was at the museum. Again, you stumble on these things and I'm like, that's the Apple Valley Inn. And it mentioned it was the Apple Valley Inn. And I'm like, wait. So Richard Nixon rented, like this was, so another little nugget to bring in when you're talking about American history, you know, bringing up the Nixon. By the way, what do you do after you lose to Kennedy? You rent a room in the Apple Valley Inn. So, Stacy, yeah, when was the rule created? I am still looking, it is definitely not on the books. I was looking to see if it was lifted with the rules put in place in LBJ's actions, right? He put in the Civil Rights Act. Some of those were struck down, a lot of these redlining legally, but then you have, okay, great. Yeah, finding out if you guys can find stuff, but I know that redlining was coming in and this practice of why people live where they are. I honestly have to tell you, as a young person, I didn't grow up probably when this was legally impacted, but I know that I grew up in a less diverse high school because of it. And it makes me mad. It makes me mad. I was always wondering why. It wasn't until I went to junior college at BBC that I got to be so immersed with a lot more diversity in my community. And I always wondered why I only had, and now looking back, I'm like, dang, that makes me mad that I didn't get more of a diverse area. These things have long lasting impacts on the community. So, right. And thank you guys for sharing those resources, the deeds that exclude buyers. And to know that it happened here. Again, we always like, oh, it happened everywhere else. It happened in our little high desert community for sure. Yeah, Phelan was a racist completely. Yeah, he was a congressperson. That's the town I live in. So yeah, and kids love to hear about, the ins and outs of these. I don't know why they name what they do. So I just want to, I know our time is, I want to run in, this is just another one that I don't know if people have heard of, but looking at, our recent issues with police brutality, the famous case that comes to mind, right? Police brutality, Rodney King, videotape. Here's a quote from George Bush: "What I saw made me sick. It's sickening to see the beating," right? That was rendered. "There's no way, in my view, to explain it away. It was outrageous." This, and I love getting footage where this just wakes up the country. People were hoping that, now you're seeing what's happening in some of these corners in these cities. And of course, we have videotapes everywhere, but 2 years before Rodney King, videotape was first used here in Victorville. It was a case in San Bernardino County. Notice the LA Times running this headline, that this is known as the Victorville Five. Felix Diaz actually does mention this as well. He knew some of the men and lived through that. He does mention a little bit of that in his book, but I'm still working on, I have some lawyers, I'm trying to get the actual transcripts of the case. I do want to see this pretrial argument, especially where they're arguing whether or not the video footage can even be admitted as evidence. So fascinating. Right here, San Bernardino County had to deal with this question a few years before Rodney King. And the outcome was they won. So unlike Rodney King, where we see that, many people's perspectives, justice was not reached, or the verdict, this nearly $1 million awarded. And I just put a little bit of excerpt there. Nearly $1 million Wednesday, 3 Hispanic men finding their civil rights were violated by San Bernardino County sheriffs accused of brutality and unlawful arrest. At the 3-week trial, neighbors videotape. That's what's catching it, which began with a complaint about a loud drunken party. The plaintiffs testified. Deputies used fists, batons, elbows, chokeholds to break up their party. And it got caught on camera. So this is before, again, I thought this was fascinating. And it's not as easy to research. I still have yet to get a good History Day project out of this. I keep telling my kids, I'm like, you guys want to research this? It sounds so fascinating. But I know my dad was in the sheriff's posse in Apple Valley. So the sheriff, Floyd Tidwell, was actually named in a subsequent lawsuit. I was like, oh, spicy. So just interesting, again, to find those local connections. And why would this matter to our students? Right? Even knowing something like that. And I don't know if many of you guys get to teach the Rodney King riots or get that far. Yeah, I see. You don't know how it's true, but the Klan was rumored to be the home of the Klan. Yeah, we've had, I went to the Museum of Tolerance a few years back, and there's a great, if you can ever see a former white supremacist that has converted, and he speaks about what drew him to the movement, what got him out and saved him, and well, just so we can learn. And I was there with my family, and Phelan is known for being home to some white supremacists. And it was funny because he knew exactly, I didn't even have to say Phelan. I said the high desert, and he knew my town. And I thought, well, yeah, unfortunately, there are other people now, yeah. Relevancy and community, yeah, I think, right, Liz, it has happened here too. Not everything that we're going to study in US history is going to have that local connection, but to let them know. And I think too, and my issues do tend to stem like civil rights in this theme that I've got presented here. But letting people know that it wasn't just the South. Yeah, still the Klan in the 80s. And it's not easy. So here's what I would like if we have any time left, but thinking about anything you guys could share, other local histories. I know some of you guys aren't from the high desert or San Bernardino County, but you know, any other, I know that I didn't bring up the house in Riverside. Which one is it? The
Harada House.
Harada House, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm put in there. Yeah.
There's a lot, like when we start thinking about, and I think it'd be helpful, maybe even through the network we have here. Be great, you know, we use those Padlets or somewhere where people could, you know, when we start finding things, sharing them, because it was Liz who turned me on to Lopez versus Seacom. I didn't never know about that until we were chatting about that. And so we are our own network of resources, and I think it helps.
I think there's something that you've done that I'm not sure you are aware that you've done, but you've talked about, in reality, the issues that are happening to a group of people that is wrong. But you're also pointing out that, because there's a lot of court cases. And so what you're also showing is there are ways to fix it. And I think that's real important right now with our students.
Yeah, a lot of it is legal. You're right. Looking at the Victorville 5, looking at the Lopez Seacom, you know, and where that leads to.
Well, even the Dude Ranch is that way.
Yeah.
Because it, you know, they become so good at it. People come from all over the place to join it. But they also had a story. The part of the story is that they were helping the kids who didn't have families or had been in trouble with the law or whatever. We don't know quite why they were in trouble. And they made themselves into somebody that cared about that group of kids.
Yeah. When I see Bruce's Beach, and look at what's happened, you know, that they have gotten some justice in that case or in that issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if any of you guys have had a chance to visit in Redlands, the Insane Asylum Museum. What, slip in my mind the name of it.
It's Patton State Hospital Museum.
Have any of you guys been able to visit it?
Yes, we took a group of ICAS teachers there once.
Yeah, I was really sad to have missed out on that. I heard it was fascinating.
I actually, the curator was my student teacher. She was a student teacher of mine. I'm so excited for her to put that together. It's like a living history museum or a living national history project. I love to take, you know, I haven't gotten a group of students to take there, but I want to take them and see, like, this is what a national history project looks like in the real world, like museum curation, research. Oh my gosh, walking through there and seeing I mean, if a psychology class, I'm just thinking our psychology class, she should go there because it was the brunt of the institutionalized programs that were throughout the state, you know, and the changes and everything that's happened. And it's still actually open. So yeah. And it was interesting. I actually have to share, a friend of mine has written a book, Todd Anton. He's actually written a couple of books. He's a teacher at Heritage Middle School. And if you look up his books, it was World War II and baseball was his first one. He's actually worked with Tom Hanks now and Steven Spielberg. He's on a committee. I think they're talking about movies, but his whole goal was to talk. He'd heard some stories. He wanted to record these stories of these veterans who left baseball to go fight. They gave up their careers and, you know, never came home to these careers. And he said, I was planning to go all over the world or the country and travel. And he started doing his research, and his first person he found was in Barstow. That was my favorite. So he realized that right here, I remember having students, I said, one of my favorite projects I taught in summer school, US history, I said, hey, your research project is to go find somebody who lived through something historic. And I just said it. I said, go find somebody. They lived through something historic, somebody older than you. Has to be a generation ahead of you. I had a student come back, one of the members of the Tuskegee Airmen was in Victorville, right? And he went to her church. And I said, what? And then another girl was living next door to a good friend of Ron Kovic from Born on the 4th of July. I was like, wait, you guys, wait, you don't even know. They were bringing back. So if you're ever like, hey, I don't know any, I want to find out what is out there. Maybe you assign that. Just go home and start talking to your family members. And, do they know anybody who lived through something famous? You might be surprised what you uncover. And then finally, I was just going to share this real quick. Library of Congress, I just put links in here for you. This is the institute, the webinars I'm currently part of. Taking these, I will tell you right now, they're free. And if you get accepted into the webinar, they are 3 college units through UCSD. So I'm getting my grad credits free. I'm getting 6 units now. I was like, what? This is incredible. So I put the link there for the Library of Congress Institutes. And then one of my favorite things was to do thematic. Thank you, Liz Ramos, to introducing me to this idea of thematic history. Last year we taught world together, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this in US this year. So I came across this book. This woman is phenomenal. Rosalie Metro is, oh my God, Rosalie Metro is, she's already put them together for US and world. Document-based lessons. I'm now teaching, right now I'm doing the government, business, and workers unit. And the overarching question is, what is the role of government and business in protecting the well-being of American people? And we started with industrialization. We talked about the Gilded Age. Then we talked about the reforms, the unions, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. At the meantime, the news is coming in, with the big tech and Amazon. And so we were looking at Amazon's warehouse compared to Ford's assembly line. And and then we talked about prohibition. We talked about trust busting. We're moving now into the New Deal. It'll go all the way to Reagan, Reagan's Great Society, or Reagan's economic policies. And really the kids are constantly looking at regulation. Can government solve society's problems? Or, can business solve them? And so they're constantly going back and forth. It's going to be fun when they finish the unit and debate. But then the next unit starts next month of under what circumstances should the US intervene in world events? And I'm like, guys, I'm not planning this, like Ukraine and Russia and all this is happening. And I'm just like, wow. And so if you're interested at all in looking at thematic, I came across that resource this summer and I've been borrowing from it. And it's turned out to be quite phenomenal. It's not an easy feat to do thematically, but so far I think my students are getting more out of it than when I did the traditional chronological US history march through time. So if you're interested, I'd love to, I'm free to chat about that, what I've learned as I'm going through the process. Liz already has it mastered in world. So I don't know if any of you guys all are doing the thematic theme. That's a whole nother conversation going.
And just asking, because it's Peg Hill, I don't know whether everybody realized that I'm part of setting some of this kind of stuff up for the Inland Council. But is this the kind of thing that you could use? It looks to me like it'd be great fun, but I can't hear you because I'm not able to read the chat because it's too little for me. I can't.
Oh, I can read that too.
But what she's doing made me very excited, but I didn't know if I was having the same results for you. To connect historical things to what's happening now seems to me a really important way of keeping the kids. Well, I think they'll be in the palm of your hand, to be honest about it, but they will be also reading, watching the news and reading newspapers and magazines and things about what's going on in the world once they understand the context of it. It's you can't start from scratch and know everything, and it doesn't, because what you're reading doesn't mean anything to you unless you have those connections, that context to put it in.
Peg, that's a great idea. And I often will show CNN 10 with my sophomores to help make connections. Yes, CNN 10. And I start off the school year looking at the SDGs from the United Nations. And that becomes our frame that we're constantly making connections to. And so doing that with current events in our class ecology that we're doing the first couple of weeks of school before we get into content helps the kids to kind of get a handle on some of these topics. And then when we're looking at issues, we're constantly making connections between, okay, which issues, which of these SDGs is this related to? And then they kind of see connections between the past and today. When we did our semester one final, it was Socratic. They freaking knocked it out of the park with imperialism and industrialization in our progress unit, making connections, referring back to SDGs, bringing in stuff from CNN 10. It is amazing. And my teacher heart was like overflowed that day.
Wonderful.
I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is my first year here in the Inland Empire. But the reason I come to these types of things is to learn more about your local history, because I've always been kind of obsessed wherever I go about, why is this here, and who's that famous person that building, or not so famous person is that building named after. And so I always find it interesting, and I've always done this with my students. I teach world history, economics, and government, but I bring a lot of local influence into it, especially with the government and the economics classes, especially local economics, things within Riverside County and Jurupa Valley and whatnot. So I've used a lot of these different techniques, but I mainly come into these sessions just so I can learn more about your area and hear from you, especially, growing up in Victorville and Apple Valley and whatnot. So I find it really, it's really cool to hear the stories in the different places. And when I'm out exploring, I run into these things like, I live in Corona. So for example, the former Hotel California in Norco, which I believe is a prison, operating prison, which is at like 140% occupancy right now. But it's interesting because I went up there and I checked it out and I was like, okay, so this was a Hollywood celebrity hangout back in the 1930s, and then was abandoned for many years, and then became part of the California penitentiary system years later. So I find this stuff very interesting.
Great.
Jeremy, the Stringfellow pits, I put the link to an article in there. There's some really cool, there's a couple, I can't remember, I'd have to search, cool YouTube videos that they talk about it. And there was this toxic pit type of thing in the community, and parents and some of the teachers were bringing up concerns. They didn't do anything, but they had a drill and they had a code on the type of bells, like if that overflowed, like, okay, we got to evacuate. Then they had one like, there's no time to evacuate, get on top of the desk. And they knew the stuff was so toxic. And then they had an accident. And toxic makes connection with super fun. And it's still like a bunch of crap. And it's right by you there in Jurupa. And I put the link in there. Stringfellow pits might be an interesting one for your area.
Sure. Yeah. Lots of interesting things. Even this Wineville chicken coop murder. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but that was something. There's a street called Wineville, and I made the connection with the story that I had read long ago about that. That's interesting. But my kids since I'm from Minneapolis, my kids are always asking me about the George Floyd case all the time. And I live just over a mile away from where that all went down. And it was and I explained to them the riots and the looting and the burning of the buildings and whatnot. And I lived in an area where that was happening. So I had some pictures, and, I talked to them about that one. The one night I was sitting outside at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was just so loud and so much going on and so crazy. It was just, and the kids are always interested in that. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. And sharing our stories and getting a chance. That's awesome that you're from Minneapolis. You could share some stories with us.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So I just want to say thank you guys. Awesome. Like I just have a list of things now. I'm going to tell you, I was selfish in agreeing to take this on because I knew I'd walk away with other local history ideas. So I love it. I think it's great. And I just think, like I said, I've learned more from colleagues and you guys than finding them on my own. So it'd be nice to have a network where we could share some of these resources, you know, like a one location or something.
I think that means we need a blog on for ICUS to do local history things. I think that'd be fun. Now, I'm not smart enough techno-wise to be able to set up the blog yet, but if somebody would explain it to me, I would be glad to do it, because I think it would be really fun and way of connecting with each other, and not just our small group, but I think there might be people all over the place that would be interested in that.
I'd be willing to help, and I know Liz knows how to help, like just setting up a weekly even or something, right?
It would be
could
better
start
for a
adding.
blog, because then we would have it on the internet with people that would be interested in, you know, whatever title we give it. But I started to learn how to do blogging, and then the holidays came up and some family things. And then when I went back to it, I couldn't get back in. So I think I did something bad. I'm not sure what, but whatever it was, I didn't mean to. But anyway, I had a great afternoon here, listening not just to Jeni, because it was hard to ever, there were so many things, you know, just keeping up with it. But the stories are wonderful. But I loved the interactivity that people were giving here, and it really made for a wonderful session. And I hope we're able to keep this going. We did record, and we'll try to get it onto the YouTube page so that you would have something to share with other teachers if you wanted to do so. But tell people about it if you did enjoy. And we've got another program coming up at the end of February. It's the 22nd, 23rd, or 24th, and I haven't been told yet which day it's going to be. And it will be for strategies that would work across grade levels and integrate the history, the topics that we've been talking about, and but also this teacher has been finding that if she uses the primary sources and the skill sets that history teachers use more than English teachers, because it's often stories for English teachers, but this is primary source material and it's real stuff, and kids get very into it, and she has a lot to share with that. And so I'm really looking forward to that event as well. So I really appreciate you being here, and I really, really appreciate Jeni and all that took a lot of preparation to do that, and we really appreciated it. So, and it will be posted on YouTube if they think everything has been you know, showed where you got it, and it looked to me like every place you put where it was from, so they shouldn't be objecting. So, and now, did anybody else want to share and do a program for us? It's just for other teachers, and it's teachers by teachers for teachers, and something that you're really interested in. If you want to do it, all you have to do is go to iesocialstudies@gmail.com. It's IE Social Studies, one word, and then an @ and Gmail. Okay, so if you have an idea, please share it, because it you know, we don't know, we make you into a star. Who knows what will happen. So thank you all very much for being here, and we'll see you again at the end of February, hopefully. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeni.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dana.
Kat.
Awesome.
I miss you guys. It was so good to see you. It's been so
I
long.
know.
Yeah, I know. CNN 10, right? Keeping us real. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yes. Okay, take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
You
Good
too, you
night.
too. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Good to see you, Laura, or talk to you, Laura. It's been so long.
Oh. Okay, I have to leave.
End the meeting.
And